angry gorilla keeps flipping her baby upside down, but what his brother did was amazing. The first thing anyone noticed was not the aggression. It was the silence that came just before it. A silence so dense it felt like it had weight, like the humid air before a storm finally breaks. The enclosure, usually alive with the low rumble of contented gorilla chatter and the soft rustle of straw bedding, had fallen into an unnatural stillness. Even the distant calls of birds seemed to fade, as if the world itself had stepped back, holding its breath. She stood there, massive, powerful, her dark fur catching streaks of pale morning light that filtered through the enclosure glass. Her chest rose and fell in slow, heavy movements, each breath carrying a faint, earthy scent of damp soil and vegetation. In her arms, cradled awkwardly, was her infant, and then, without warning, she flipped him. The motion was abrupt, violent, almost mechanical. The baby's small body turned upside down in her grip, his fragile limbs dangling, his tiny fingers curling instinctively into the air as if searching for something that was no longer there. A soft, high-pitched whimper escaped him, a sound so thin and delicate it barely seemed to belong in a world built on strength. She didn't react. She simply stared. And then she did it again. For a moment, no one moved. Not the keepers watching through reinforced glass, not the visitors who had unknowingly wandered into something they didn't understand, not even the wind that pressed gently against the enclosure walls, carrying with it the faint metallic scent of rain, waiting somewhere far beyond the horizon. Because this wasn't normal. This wasn't instinct. This was something else. Before we go deeper into this story, before we try to understand what no one could explain at first, take a moment to become part of this journey. If you feel something already, if your chest tightens or your curiosity pulls you forward, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. There's something powerful about knowing that across the world, hearts are watching the same moment unfold together. Now, back to the silence. The enclosure itself had always been a carefully crafted illusion of the wild. Large stone formations rose like ancient sentinels, their surfaces rough and cool to the touch, layered with moss that carried the faint scent of moisture and age. Tall grasses swayed gently, brushing against each other with a whispering sound that mimicked the forests these gorillas had once known. The ground was soft in places, packed firm in others, a mixture of soil and straw that released a warm, organic aroma whenever disturbed. This was her world, and once it had been peaceful. She had been known among the keepers as calm, protective, attentive in a way that suggested something deeper than instinct, a kind of quiet awareness. When her baby was born, the bond between them had been immediate and undeniable. She held him close, her massive arms forming a living shield around his tiny body. She groomed him with slow, deliberate movements, her fingers gentle despite their strength, brushing through his fine infant fur while he pressed himself into her warmth. There had been trust, a rhythm, a shared breath. In those early days, visitors would often pause at the glass, watching the way she cradled him, how her eyes softened when he stirred, how she would tilt her head ever so slightly when he made the smallest sound. There was a sweetness in those moments, a quiet, unspoken understanding that transcended species. But something had changed. At first, it was subtle, a hesitation in her movements, a slight delay in how she responded to his cries. The keepers noticed it in the way she would reposition him, not with care, but with uncertainty, as if she were trying to solve a problem she couldn't quite understand. And then came the flipping. Again and again. Each time, the baby's distress grew. His cries became sharper, more desperate, cutting through the enclosure like fragile threads of sound. The air itself seemed to carry his fear, mixing with the scent of straw and the faint tang of something else, something uneasy. The keepers began to gather. Their voices were low, controlled, but underneath it all was a rising tension. They watched closely, documenting every movement, every reaction. From a clinical perspective, they knew the possibilities: maternal rejection, neurological distress, hormonal imbalance. But none of it quite fit. Because she wasn't rejecting him, she wasn't abandoning him, she was doing something far more confusing. She was trying. And failing. The baby's condition began to deteriorate. His movements, once energetic and curious, became sluggish. His cries weakened, turning into soft, intermittent whimpers that barely carried across the enclosure. There was a change in his breathing, subtle at first, then more pronounced. Short, shallow bursts, followed by pauses that stretched just a little too long. The experts felt it before they could fully articulate it. Something was wrong. The air that day felt heavier than usual, thick with the scent of approaching rain and the faint, almost metallic trace of anxiety that seemed to cling to every surface. The light had shifted too, no longer bright and warm, but diffused, as if the sky itself had dimmed in anticipation of what might come. Inside the enclosure, she continued. Flip. Pause. Stare. Flip again. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't cruelty. It was confusion, wrapped in urgency. And then something unexpected happened. From the far side of the enclosure, where shadows lingered longer and the ground remained cool even under daylight, another figure began to move. He was larger, older. His presence carried a different kind of weight, not just physical, but emotional. There was a steadiness in him, a grounded calm that seemed to absorb the tension around him. His fur, darker and thicker, caught the dim light in muted tones, and his eyes held something that felt almost human in its depth. He had been watching, quietly, patiently. While the others hesitated, while the keepers debated intervention, he stepped forward. The ground shifted slightly under his weight, releasing a deeper, richer scent of earth. The soft crunch of straw beneath his feet broke the silence in a way that felt deliberate, intentional. She noticed him. For a moment, everything froze. Her body tensed, her grip tightening around the baby, not in aggression, but in a kind of defensive uncertainty. Her breathing quickened, the rhythm uneven now, matching the tension that pulsed through the air. He didn't rush, he didn't threaten. He simply approached, slowly, carefully, each movement measured, as if he understood that this moment required something more than strength. It required trust. When he reached her, he paused, close enough to touch, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body, to hear the uneven cadence of her breath, to sense the fragile life cradled between her arms. And then he did something no one expected. He reached out, not with force, not with dominance, but with a gentleness that seemed almost impossible given his size. His fingers brushed lightly against the baby. The infant let out a weak sound, a soft, trembling cry that barely disturbed the air. But it was enough. The male's posture changed, subtly. His head tilted, his nostrils flaring slightly as he drew in the scent, deeper now, more focused. There was something there, something hidden beneath the familiar smell of fur and straw and warmth. Something wrong. The keepers leaned closer, their eyes narrowing, their focus sharpening. This was the moment. The reveal came not in a dramatic gesture, but in a quiet realization. The baby wasn't being mistreated. He was in distress, a physical condition, subtle, internal, but critical. His breathing patterns, his weakness, the way his body responded when moved, it all pointed to something deeper, something the mother had sensed but couldn't understand. Her flipping behavior wasn't random. It was instinct trying to solve a problem. She was trying to make him respond, trying to wake him, trying to fix what she could feel but not see. And the male, he understood. In a way that bypassed logic, he gently adjusted the baby's position, turning him not upside down but onto his side, supporting his small body with a stability that the mother hadn't been able to maintain in her panic. His movements were slow, deliberate, guided by something that felt like experience, or perhaps something even more profound. The baby's breathing changed, just slightly, but enough. The pause between breaths shortened. The rhythm became more consistent. A faint strength returned to his small chest as it rose and fell with a little more certainty. The mother watched, still, silent. Her tension didn't disappear immediately. It lingered in the tightness of her muscles, in the way her eyes moved between the male and her infant. But there was something else now, too. Recognition. The male remained close, his presence steady, his breathing deep and even. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the mother's breathing began to match his. The frantic edge softened, replaced by a more controlled rhythm. For the first time in what felt like hours, the air in the enclosure shifted. The heaviness lifted, just a little. The scent of rain finally arrived, carried in on a cool breeze that brushed against the glass, bringing with it the clean, fresh smell of water touching earth. The light softened further, turning everything into muted shades of gray and green. Inside, something fragile was being rebuilt. Trust, connection, life. The baby let out a small sound, not a cry this time, but something quieter, steadier. His tiny fingers curled, finding the familiar texture of fur. His body, once limp, now held just enough strength to respond. The mother moved closer. Slowly, carefully. She reached out, her movements no longer frantic but cautious, guided by the calm that had settled around them. When she took him back into her arms, it was different this time. She held him upright, supported, secure, and for a moment, everything aligned. Their breathing, their stillness, their presence. This was the resolution, not a sudden miracle, but a gradual return. A healing that began not with intervention, but with understanding. The keepers would later confirm the condition, provide the necessary care, ensure the baby's recovery, but what happened in that moment, that belonged to them, to instinct, to connection, to something deeper than science alone could explain. Because what this story leaves behind is not just a memory of crisis, but a question. What do animals feel that we still struggle to understand? There is a kind of intelligence that doesn't rely on language, a sensitivity that moves through scent, through rhythm, through the smallest shifts in behavior. A sixth sense that recognizes distress not as a concept, but as a presence. The mother knew something was wrong. She didn't have the tools to fix it. But she tried. The male saw what she couldn't, and he responded, not with force, but with empathy. And in that shared moment, life was protected. As the rain finally began to fall, tapping softly against the enclosure glass, the world seemed to exhale. The scent of wet earth grew stronger, richer, wrapping around everything like a quiet reassurance. Inside, the family remained close, still, together. If this story moved you even a little, take a moment now to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who understands the quiet power of connection. And tell us in the comments, have you ever witnessed a moment where an animal seemed to understand something beyond words? Where instinct felt like empathy and behavior felt like love? Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't told, they're felt.